The airplane sat frozen on the runway at New York's JFK Airport. Inside, passengers whispered nervously as they watched something unbelievable unfold before their eyes. A well-dressed black man stood in the aisle of first class, his voice calm but filled with power that made everyone listen. "This aircraft is not going anywhere," he said firmly. "In fact, this plane is grounded until further notice." Emily Robinson, the head flight attendant, stood nearby. Her face had gone completely white, like she'd seen a ghost. Her hands were shaking, and she looked like she might faint at any second. You can't do that," Emily stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "You're just a passenger. You can't ground a plane." The man pulled out his phone and made a quick call. "This is Daniel Miller," he said into the phone. "Ground Flight 447 immediately. Cancel all departure clearances." "Yes, right now." Within seconds, the pilot's voice came over the intercom, sounding confused and shocked. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have been ordered to return to the gate. We will not be departing at this time." The passengers gasped. Some pulled out their phones to record what was happening. Others looked around in total confusion, trying to understand what was going on. Emily's legs seemed to wobble beneath her. She grabbed onto a seat to steady herself. "This can't be happening," she whispered to herself. "This can't be real." But it was real, very real. Daniel Miller turned to face Emily directly. His eyes weren't angry. They were disappointed, which somehow felt even worse. 30 minutes ago, you made a decision," he said quietly, so only she and the nearby passengers could hear. "You made a choice based on what you saw on the outside, not who I actually am." Emily opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Tears started forming in her eyes. "And now," Daniel continued, his voice still calm but with steel underneath, "you and your entire crew are going to face the consequences of that decision." Other flight attendants had gathered around, sensing something terrible was happening. They looked at Emily with confused, worried faces. What had she done? Why was this man saying these things? A businessman in seat 2A whispered to his wife, "Do you know who that is? That's Daniel Miller. He's the CEO of Sky Airlines," his wife finished, her eyes going wide. "Oh my God, he owns this airline." The whisper spread through first class like wildfire. "He's the CEO. He owns a company. That's Daniel Miller." Emily heard the whispers, and the color drained from her face even more. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. She tried to speak, tried to apologize, but Daniel held up his hand. "Not here," he said. "Not now. We'll discuss this properly with witnesses and documentation. But first, I want every passenger on this plane to know exactly what happened here today." He turned to address the entire first-class cabin, his voice clear and strong. 30 minutes ago, when I tried to board this aircraft and take my assigned first-class seat, a seat I had properly paid for, I was stopped by this flight attendant." Emily's tears started flowing freely now. She knew what was coming. "She told me," Daniel continued, his voice full of emotion now, "that there must be some mistake, that someone like me couldn't possibly have a first-class ticket. She asked to see my boarding pass 3 times. She made me stand in the jetway while she called the gate agent to verify my ticket." Gasps echoed through cabin. Passengers who had been sitting in their seats started paying full attention now. When I showed her my identification, she looked at it like it couldn't possibly be real. She asked if I had stolen the ticket. She suggested, Daniel's voice cracked slightly. She suggested that maybe I should be more comfortable in economy class. The cabin fell completely silent. You could hear a pin drop. Emily collapsed into one of the first-class seats, her hands covering her face. The other flight attendants stepped back from her, as if they didn't want to be associated with what she'd done. Daniel pulled out his phone again and made another call. "Security? This is Daniel Miller. I need you to come to Gate 27, Flight 447. We have a situation that needs to be handled immediately. Also, please send someone from HR and legal. Yes, the entire crew. Everyone." He hung up and looked around at all the flight attendants standing frozen in the aisle. "I'm sorry to the rest of you who had nothing to do with this, but this situation requires a complete investigation. Until we know exactly who was involved and who stood by and did nothing, this entire crew is suspended. One of the younger flight attendants, a woman named Sarah, started crying. Please, sir, I just started this job 2 months ago. I wasn't even there when it happened. I was in the back helping other passengers board. Daniel's expression softened slightly when he looked at her. Then the investigation will clear you. But right now, I need to send a message that this behavior is absolutely unacceptable in my company. The plane had reached the gate now, and through the windows, everyone could see security guards and people in business suits rushing toward the aircraft. Emily finally found her voice. It came out as a broken sob. Mr. Miller, please. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I didn't realize. I made a terrible mistake. You made more than a mistake, Daniel said, his voice sad now rather than angry. You made an assumption. You judged me by the color of my skin instead of treating me like every other passenger. And in doing so, you violated not only company policy, but basic human decency. The aircraft door opened, and security personnel entered, followed by 2 people carrying briefcases, clearly lawyers or HR representatives. Please escort the entire crew off this aircraft. Daniel instructed the security team. They are suspended pending a full investigation. Emily stood on shaky legs. As the security guard gently took her arm to lead her away, she turned back to Daniel one more time. I have 3 children, she whispered. I need this job. Please. Daniel's face showed pain. He wasn't enjoying this, but his voice remained firm. You should have thought about that before you discriminated against a passenger, before you judged someone based on how they look rather than who they are. As Emily and the other crew members were let off the plane, the passengers sat in stunned silence. Some were recording on their phones. Others were typing furiously, probably posting on social media about what they'd just witnessed. A little girl in seat 3B, who couldn't have been more than 7 years old, tugged on her mother's sleeve. Mommy, why was that lady mean to that nice man? Her mother hugged her close, trying to find the right words. Sometimes, sweetie, people make very bad choices, and those choices have consequences. Daniel overheard this and turned to the little girl. For the first time since the confrontation began, he smiled slightly. That's exactly right, young lady. Always remember to treat everyone with kindness, no matter what they look like. The little girl nodded seriously, and Daniel felt a small bit of satisfaction. If nothing else, maybe the children witnessing this would learn an important lesson. But the story was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. As Daniel prepared to address the remaining passengers, his phone buzzed with an incoming call. He looked at the screen, and his expression changed to one of concern. The number calling was from his corporate office. His assistant marked urgent. He answered. What is it? His face grew darker as he listened to whatever was being said on the other end. The passengers who were watching him closely saw his jaw clench and his free hand curl into a fist. When did this happen? He asked sharply. How many people know? More listening. His eyes narrowed. Get everyone in the boardroom. I'll be there within the hour. He paused. And find out if Emily Robinson has any connection to. He stopped himself, glancing at the curious passengers. We'll discuss this in person. He hung up and took a deep breath, composing himself. But something had clearly shifted. This wasn't just about one discriminatory flight attendant anymore. This was about to become something much, much bigger. And as security finished removing the crew and new flight attendants began boarding to take over flight, Daniel Miller made a decision. He wasn't going to let this go. He was going to dig deeper into what had happened today. And he had a feeling he was going to uncover something that would shock everyone. But before we see what Daniel was about to uncover, we need to go back. Back to where this whole terrible day began. Back to when Daniel Miller was just trying to catch a flight home, with no idea that his life was about to turn upside down. It was early morning at JFK Airport, and Daniel had been in New York for 3 days of back-to-back business meetings. He was exhausted. All he wanted was to get on his plane, sink into his comfortable first-class seat, and maybe sleep for the entire flight back to his home in Chicago. Daniel Miller didn't look like what most people imagine when they thought of CEO. He was only 35 years old, which was young for someone running a major airline. He usually wore expensive suits to the office, but today he was dressed casually, jeans, a simple black t-shirt, and a comfortable jacket. He carried a worn backpack instead of a fancy briefcase. After 3 days of stuffy meetings, he just wanted to be comfortable. What most people didn't know was that Daniel had built sky-high airlines from almost nothing. 10 years ago, he'd been a regular pilot with big dreams and a small inheritance from his grandmother. He'd taken that money, bought 2 old planes, and started flying routes that bigger airlines ignored. He'd worked 20-hour days, sometimes flying the planes himself, sometimes cleaning them, and sometimes handling customer service calls at midnight. Now, Sky High Airlines had over 200 planes and flew to 40 different countries. Daniel had become one of the youngest black CEOs in the airline industry, but he never forgot where he came from. He never forgot the struggles. That's why he always flew on his own planes when he could. He wanted to see what his passengers experienced. He wanted to know if his employees were treating people right. Usually, he did this quietly, not telling anyone who he was. Today, he wished he'd worn a suit and announced himself immediately. As Daniel walked through the airport toward his gate, he noticed people staring at him. This wasn't unusual. He'd dealt with suspicious looks his entire life. The expensive first-class ticket in his phone didn't stop security from randomly selecting him for extra screening. It didn't stop other passengers from clutching their bags a little tighter when he walked by. Daniel had learned to ignore it most days, but today he was tired. Today, it stung a little more than usual. He reached gate 27 and joined the line to board. First-class passengers were called first, and Daniel stepped forward with his boarding pass ready on his phone. That's when he first saw Emily Robinson. She stood at the entrance to the jetway, scanning boarding passes with a bright smile. She was probably in her early 40s, with blonde hair pulled back in a neat bun. Her uniform was perfectly pressed, and her smile seemed friendly enough. "Good morning," she said cheerfully to the passenger in front of Daniel, a white businessman in an expensive suit. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Anderson. Enjoy your flight in first class." The businessman nodded and walked past her into the jetway. Daniel stepped forward next, holding up his phone with his boarding pass displayed clearly on the screen. Emily's smile didn't exactly disappear, but it changed. It became tighter, less genuine. Her eyes scanned Daniel from head to toe, taking in his casual clothes, his backpack, and his tired face. "Can I help you?" she asked. Her tone was different now. Not exactly rude, but not friendly either. Suspicious. "Yes, I'm boarding," Daniel said simply, still holding up his phone. Emily squinted at his boarding pass, then looked back at him. "This is first class," she said slowly, like she was pointing out an obvious mistake. "That's right," Daniel confirmed, keeping his voice calm and polite. "Are you sure this is your boarding pass?" Emily asked, her eyebrows raised. Daniel felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the feeling he got whenever something like this happened. "Yes, I'm sure. It's my boarding pass for seat 2C, first class." Emily didn't move aside to let him pass. Instead, she pulled out a small scanner and scanned his boarding pass herself. The scanner beeped, a normal confirmation beep. Everything was in order, but Emily still looked doubtful. "I'm going to need to see some identification," she said. Behind Daniel, other first-class passengers were starting to line up. They were watching this interaction with curious faces, wondering what the holdup was. "Of course," Daniel said calmly. He'd been through this before. He pulled out his driver's license and handed it to her. Emily studied it carefully, looking back and forth between the ID and Daniel's face multiple times. She held it up to the light, like she was checking if it was fake. "This seems unusual," she finally said. "Can you wait here for just a moment?" "Is there a problem?" Daniel asked, his patience starting to wear thin. "I just need to verify something," Emily said. Without waiting for his response, she stepped away and called over another gate agent, a young man named Marcus. Daniel could hear their whispered conversation. "I don't think that ticket is really his," Emily was saying. "He doesn't look like our typical first-class passenger. Can you call the ticketing desk and verify?" Marcus glanced over at Daniel, and Daniel saw something in the young man's eyes. Recognition, maybe, Or was it sympathy? But Marcus didn't say anything. He just nodded and picked up the phone at the gate desk. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Daniel stood in the jetway entrance while other first-class passengers squeezed past him, some giving him dirty looks for blocking the way. Some whispered to each other. Daniel heard snippets of their conversations. What's the holdup? Security issue, maybe? He doesn't have a right ticket, I think. Daniel's hands clenched into fists at his sides, but he kept his face neutral. He would not lose his temper. He would not give them any excuse to call real security. Finally, Marcus hung up the phone and walked back over to Emily. He whispered something to her, and she nodded. Emily came back to Daniel, and this time her suspicion had turned into something harder. Sir, I'm going to need you to step aside. There are some questions about your ticket. Questions. Daniel's voice was still calm, but there was steel underneath now. What questions? My ticket is valid. You scanned it yourself. The system shows this ticket was purchased with. There may have been some fraud involved, Emily said, lowering her voice. But not low enough. Passengers nearby heard her and gasped. Daniel couldn't believe what he was hearing. Fraud? I purchased this ticket myself, with my own credit card, through your airline's website. Nevertheless, I can't allow you board first class at this time, Emily said firmly. However, we do have seats available in economy. I'd be happy to move you there, where you might be more comfortable. The way she said comfortable made Daniel's blood boil. He knew exactly what she meant. She thought he didn't belong in first class. She thought someone who looked like him, dressed like him, couldn't possibly afford or deserve a first-class seat. And that's when Daniel Miller made his decision. He wasn't going to let this go. Not this time. He pulled out his phone and made a call, stepping away from Emily slightly. This is Daniel Miller, he said clearly. Access my employee file. I need my full credentials and identification sent to gate 27 immediately. Yes, I'll wait. Emily overheard the name Daniel Miller, but it didn't register. Why would it? She'd never met the CEO. The company had thousands of employees. What Emily didn't know was that in about 15 minutes, her whole world was going to come crashing down, and Daniel Miller was just getting started while Daniel waited for credentials to arrive. Emily made her biggest mistake yet. She walked back to the gate desk and picked up the microphone for the boarding announcement. Her voice echoed to the entire gate area, loud enough for hundreds of waiting passengers to hear. Attention passengers on Flight 447 to Chicago. We are experiencing a slight delay due to a ticketing issue. We apologize for the inconvenience and will begin boarding again shortly. Then she turned to the other gate agent, Marcus, but she didn't lower her voice enough. Several passengers sitting near the desk heard every word she said next. I don't know how he got that first-class ticket, but something isn't right. People like him don't just fly first class on a Tuesday morning. He's probably using a stolen credit card or something. An older woman sitting nearby, Mrs. Patricia Hayes, gasped loudly. She was a sweet grandmother who'd been traveling to visit her daughter, and she couldn't believe what she'd just heard. Excuse me, Mrs. Hayes said, standing up and walking to the desk. Did you just say people like him? What exactly do you mean by that? Emily's face flushed red. She realized she'd been overheard. Ma'am, this doesn't concern you. Please take your seat. It concerns me when I hear discrimination happening right in front of my eyes, Mrs. Hayes said firmly. That young man has done nothing wrong. He showed you his ticket. He showed you his ID. What more do you want? Other passengers were paying attention now. Some were nodding in agreement with Mrs. Hayes. Others were pulling out their phones, starting to record. Emily felt trapped. She'd gone too far, and she knew it, but she couldn't back down now without looking foolish. Ma'am, I'm doing my job. I have the right to verify any passenger's credentials if something seems suspicious. And what exactly seems suspicious? Mrs. Hayes pressed. The fact that he's a young black man who dared to buy a first-class ticket? The gate area went completely silent. Everyone was watching now. Emily's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. She looked around desperately for support, but Marcus had stepped away, distancing himself from the situation. The other airline employees nearby suddenly found their computers very interesting. That's when a man in a sharp business suit came rushing down the terminal toward gate 27. He was carrying a briefcase and looked very official. This was James Peterson, the airport senior manager for Sky High Airlines. "Emily Robinson?" James called out as he approached. Emily turned, relief flooding her face. Finally, someone in authority who could help her deal with the situation. "Yes, that's me. Thank goodness you're here. We have a passenger who—" "Where's Daniel Miller?" James interrupted, his face serious. Emily blinked confused. I don't know who that is. I'm dealing with a passenger with a suspicious first-class ticket, and You need to show me where Daniel Miller is right now," James said, his voice urgent and worried. "He called my office 5 minutes ago. Do you understand who Daniel Miller is?" Emily shook her head slowly. A cold feeling was starting to spread through her stomach. James lowered his voice, but his words hit Emily like a physical blow. "Daniel Miller is the CEO and owner of Sky High Airlines. He owns this entire company. Every plane, every gate, every employee, including you." Emily's face went completely white. Her legs wobbled, and she had to grab the desk to keep from falling. "No," she whispered. "No, that can't be. The passenger I stopped, he was wearing jeans and a t-shirt. He had a backpack." "Where is he?" James asked again, each word sharp and clear. Emily pointed with a shaking hand toward the jetway entrance, where Daniel was still standing, calmly talking on his phone. James's face went from worried to horrified. "Oh no, Emily, what did you do?" I was just doing my job. He didn't look like..." Emily couldn't finish her sentences. Her whole world was collapsing around her. James walked quickly toward Daniel, and Emily followed behind him on trembling legs. Several passengers followed too, sensing that something important was about to happen. Mrs. Hayes was right behind Emily, determined to see this through. "Mr. Miller," James said as he approached, slightly out of breath. "Sir, I came as soon as I got your call. I am so sorry for whatever has happened here." Daniel ended his phone call and looked at James. His face was calm, but his eyes were cold. "Hello, James. Thank you for coming quickly. Mr. Miller, please, if you could tell me what happened, I'll fix this immediately," James said desperately. Daniel glanced at Emily, who stood frozen several feet away, her face the color of paper. Then he looked back at James. "This flight attendant," Daniel said clearly, pointing at Emily, "refused to let me board the plane with my valid first-class ticket. She accused me of fraud. She suggested I might have stolen the ticket or the credit card used to purchase it. She made me wait in the jetway for 15 minutes while she tried to verify my credentials. And she did all of this because, and I quote what she said to Marcus over there, people like him don't just fly first class on a Tuesday morning." James closed his eyes in pain. This was worse than he'd feared. "She racially profiled me, James," Daniel continued, his voice getting stronger, "in my own airline, using my own employees' policies, or rather, ignoring those policies and acting on her own prejudices." Emily finally found her voice, though it came out as a broken squeak. "Mr. Miller, please, I didn't know it was you. If you had known it was me, you would have let me board," Daniel interrupted, turning to face her directly. "But that's exactly the problem, isn't it, Emily? You would have treated me with respect if you knew I was the CEO. But because you thought I was just a regular passenger, a black passenger in casual clothes, you felt free to humiliate me, to make assumptions, to discriminate." Tears were streaming down Emily's face now. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Please, I have children. I need this job. I made a mistake." "You made a choice," Daniel corrected her. "And here's what you need to understand, Emily. Every single passenger on every single one of my planes deserves to be treated with respect. It doesn't matter if they're black or white, rich or poor, wearing a suit or wearing jeans. Everyone deserves dignity." He turned to James. "I want the full crew from this flight suspended immediately, pending investigation. I want to know who else witnessed this, and said nothing. I want to know if this is an isolated incident or if there's a pattern of discrimination in our company that I don't know about. Yes, sir, James said quietly. Right away. And James, Daniel added, get me the security footage from this gate for the past hour. I want everything documented. As James pulled out his phone to make the necessary calls, Daniel addressed the crowd of passengers who had gathered around. I apologize to all of you for this delay. This is not the kind of service Sky High Airlines stands for. Those of you who witnessed what happened here today, I ask that you stay and give statements to our HR department. Your testimony matters. Mrs. Hayes stepped forward. Mr. Miller, I saw and heard everything, and I'll be happy to tell anyone who asks exactly what this woman said and did. Several other passengers nodded and voiced their agreement. They would be witnesses. Emily sank down into one of the gate chairs, her career crashing down around her. Other flight attendants from Flight 447 were starting to arrive, wondering why their supervisor was crying and why there was such a commotion at the gate. They were about to find out that their day was about to get much, much worse. But what none of them knew yet, not Emily, not James, not even the passengers, was that Daniel's phone call earlier, the urgent one from his office, was about to reveal something that would make this situation even more complicated. Because Emily Robinson's actions today weren't random. They weren't just about one woman's prejudices. They were connected to something bigger. Something that had been happening at Sky High Airlines for months, right under Daniel's nose. And when the truth came out, it was going to shock everyone. 20 minutes later, Daniel sat in a private conference room at the airport with James Peterson, 2 HR representatives, and a lawyer from the company's legal team. Security footage played on a large screen mounted on the wall, showing everything that had happened at Gate 27 in crystal clear detail. But Daniel wasn't watching the screen anymore. He was staring at a file folder that had just been placed in front of him by Rebecca Thompson, the head of human resources. What am I looking at? Daniel asked quietly, though something in his gut told him he wasn't going to like the answer. Rebecca took a deep breath. Mr. Miller, when you called earlier and asked us to look into Emily Robinson, we did a full background check, and we found something disturbing. She opened the folder and pulled out several printed documents. Over the past 6 months, we received 14 complaints about discriminatory behavior from flight attendants and gate agents. Most of these complaints were filed by passengers of color who felt they were treated differently than white passengers. Daniel's jaw tightened. 14 complaints? Why wasn't I informed about this? Rebecca glanced at James, who looked down at the table, his face filled with shame. Sir, these complaints were filed with the regional office in New York. They were supposed to be escalated to corporate headquarters, but they weren't, Daniel finished, his voice dangerously calm. Someone buried them. Yes, sir, Rebecca confirmed. And when we started digging into who processed these complaints, we found that they all went to the same person, Richard Thompson, the regional director of operations for Northeast. Daniel's hands clenched into fists on the table. Richard Thompson. He knew that name. Richard had been with the company for 8 years, since before Sky High Airlines had become successful. Daniel had trusted him. There's more, Rebecca continued hesitantly. 7 of those 14 complaints specifically mentioned Emily Robinson by name. Passengers reported that she treated them rudely, questioned their tickets, or suggested they be more comfortable in economy class, even when they had valid first-class tickets. The room fell silent. Everyone could see the anger building in Daniel's face, but he kept his voice controlled. So Emily Robinson has been discriminating against passengers for at least 6 months, and Richard Thompson covered it up? Daniel asked. It appears so, sir, Rebecca said. But there's something else. Something worse. She pulled out another document. We also found that Emily Robinson is Richard Thompson's sister-in-law. She's married to his younger brother, David. Daniel stood up so fast that his chair rolled backward and hit the wall. Are you telling me that a regional director has been protecting his sister-in-law while she discriminates against our passengers? For 6 months. Yes, sir, Rebecca whispered. Daniel paced the room, his mind racing. How had this happened? How had something like this been going on in his company without him knowing? He'd built sky-high airlines on the principles of fairness and respect. He'd created policies specifically to prevent discrimination. And yet, here it was happening right under his nose. Where is Richard Thompson now? Daniel asked sharply. James checked his phone. According to his calendar, he's in his office in Manhattan. Should I call him? No, Daniel said firmly. Don't call him. I don't want to give him any warning. I'm going to his office myself, right now. But first, I need to handle the situation with the crew. He turned to the lawyer, a sharp woman named Jennifer Lee. Jennifer, what are my legal options here? Jennifer pulled out her notes. Given the documented pattern of discrimination and the apparent cover-up, you have grounds to terminate both Emily Robinson and Richard Thompson for cause. The other crew members who were present during today's incident, if the investigation shows they witnessed discrimination and did nothing, could face disciplinary action up to and including termination. Do it, Daniel said without hesitation. Emily Robinson is fired, effective immediately. Richard Thompson is fired, effective immediately. I want security to escort them both out of their offices today. And I want every single complaint that was buried to be reopened and investigated properly. Rebecca nodded, taking notes quickly. But, sir, James spoke up carefully. Emily has been with the company for 12 years. She has 3 children. If we fire her, she'll lose her health insurance, her pension contributions. Daniel whirled to face him. And what about the passengers she humiliated, James? What about the people she made feel small and unwelcome because of the color of their skin? What about every black person, every brown person, every person who doesn't fit her narrow idea of what a first-class passenger should look like? What about their dignity? James looked down, chastened. You're right, sir. I'm sorry. Daniel took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. I understand that this will be hard for Emily's family. I'm not heartless. But actions have consequences. And if I let this slide, if I give her just a warning or a suspension, what message does that send? It tells every other employee that discrimination is okay as long as you've been here long enough, as long as you know the right people. He looked around the room at everyone present. That's not the company I built. That's not the company we're going to be. Rebecca spoke up softly. Sir, there's one more thing you should know. When we pulled Emily's employment file, we found 3 previous complaints against her from 5 years ago. They were for rude behavior toward passengers, but the complaints mentioned that the passengers were minorities. Daniel's eyes widened. 5 years ago? So this has been going on even longer than 6 months. It appears so. Those complaints resulted in a verbal warning, but nothing more. Daniel sat back down, suddenly feeling exhausted. This was worse than he'd thought. Much worse. This wasn't just about one bad employee having a bad day. This was a systemic problem that had been allowed to fester for years. Okay, he said, rubbing his temples. Here's what we're going to do. First, we fire Emily and Richard immediately. Second, we're going to conduct a company-wide investigation into every complaint of discrimination that's been filed in the past 5 years, not just in the Northeast region, but everywhere. He looked at Jennifer. Third, I want you to contact every single passenger who filed complaint. Apologize on behalf of the company. Offer them compensation, full refunds, free flights, whatever it takes to make this right. Jennifer nodded and wrote it all down. Fourth, Daniel continued, I want mandatory anti-discrimination training for every single employee, not just the flight attendants and gate agents, everyone, from the pilots to the mechanics, to the janitors to the executives. Everyone. Rebecca was writing furiously. Yes, sir. We can have a program in place within 2 weeks. Make it 1 week, Daniel said firmly. I want this handled fast. And I want it handled right. He stood up again and grabbed his jacket. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a regional director to fire in person. As Daniel walked toward the door, James called out, Sir, what about Flight 447? The passengers are still waiting. Daniel paused at the door. Get a new crew on that plane within the hour. Upgrade every passenger to first class, free of charge, and give them all a voucher for a free round-trip flight anywhere we fly. Those people witnessed something terrible today. The least we can do is give them excellent service for the rest of their journey." "Yes, sir," James said. Daniel walked out of the conference room, his mind already focused on his next task. Richard Thompson had betrayed his trust, had allowed discrimination to flourish in the company Daniel had worked so hard to build. And Richard was about to learn that there were consequences for that betrayal. But as Daniel stepped into the elevator to leave the airport, his phone buzzed again. Another message from his assistant. This one made Daniel's blood run cold. "Sir, you need to see this." Channel 7 News is running a story. Someone recorded what happened at the gate and posted it online. It's going viral. The video has been viewed over 2 million times in the last hour. Daniel closed his eyes. The situation had just gone from bad to worse. The whole world was about to know what had happened at Sky High Airlines today, and they were all watching to see what he would do next. The video was everywhere. By the time Daniel's car pulled up to the Sky High Airlines corporate headquarters in Manhattan, the footage of Emily Robinson discriminating against him had been shared over 5 million times. It was trending on every social media platform. News helicopters circled overhead. Reporters crowded the entrance to the building, shouting questions and holding up cameras. Daniel's phone hadn't stopped buzzing. Calls from news stations, from other airline CEOs, from civil rights organizations, from government officials. Everyone wanted a statement. Everyone wanted to know what Sky High Airlines was going to do about this. But Daniel had only one focus right now: Richard Thompson. He walked through the lobby of his own building, and employees stopped and stared. Some looked sympathetic. Others looked embarrassed, as if they felt personally responsible for what had happened. A few younger employees started clapping as he passed, and soon the applause spread through the lobby. Daniel nodded to acknowledge them, but didn't stop walking. He took the elevator to the 8th floor, where the regional offices were located. Richard Thompson's secretary, a nervous young woman named Amy, jumped up from her desk when she saw Daniel approaching. "Mr. Miller." "Aye. We didn't know you were coming today." "Is he in?" Daniel asked, his voice leaving no room for small talk. "Yes, sir, but he's on a conference call." Daniel walked past her and opened Richard's office door without knocking. Richard Thompson sat behind his desk, laughing at something someone had said on his video call. He was a large man in his 50s, with gray hair and an expensive suit. When he saw Daniel enter, his smile vanished. "I'll call you back," Richard said quickly to whoever was on the screen, and ended the call. He stood up, forcing a smile. "Daniel, what a surprise. I didn't know you were." "Sit down, Richard," Daniel said coldly. Richard's smile disappeared completely. He sat down slowly, and Daniel could see the man's mind racing, trying to figure out what this was about. "I assume you've seen the video," Daniel said, standing in front of Richard's desk with his arms crossed. Richard's face went pale. "Video? What video?" "Don't play stupid with me," Daniel snapped. "The video of your sister-in-law, Emily Robinson, discriminating against me at JFK this morning. The video that's been viewed by millions of people. The video that's currently destroying our company's reputation." Richard opened his mouth, then closed it. He swallowed hard. "Daniel, I can explain." "Explain what?" Daniel interrupted. "Explain how you've been covering up discrimination complaints for months? Explain how your sister-in-law has been mistreating passengers for years, and you did nothing about it? Explain how you betrayed everything this company stands for." Richard's hands started shaking. "It wasn't like that. Emily made some mistakes, yes, but she's family. I couldn't just throw her out on the street. She has kids, Daniel. She's my brother's wife. So because she's family, she gets to humiliate people? She gets to make passengers feel worthless because of the color of their skin?" Daniel's voice rose. "You had 14 complaints, Richard. 14, and you buried them all." "I handled them internally," Richard protested weakly. "I talked to Emily. She promised to do better." "But she didn't do better," Daniel shouted. "She kept doing it, and you kept protecting her. Do you have any idea how many people she hurt? How many passengers decided never to fly with us again because of how she treated them?" Richard stood up, trying to regain some authority. "Now listen, Daniel. I've been with this company for 8 years. I helped build the Northeast region. You can't just... You're fired, Daniel said simply. Security is on their way up right now to escort you out. You have 10 minutes to pack your personal belongings. All the color drained from Richard's face. You can't do this. I'll sue. You'll do nothing, Daniel said firmly. We have documentation of every complaint you buried. We have emails showing you knew about Emily's behavior and chose to protect her. We have evidence of a pattern of discrimination that you enabled. So no, Richard, you won't sue. Because if you do, we'll countersue for breach of duty and you'll lose everything. Richard collapsed back into his chair, and for the first time, Daniel saw fear in the man's eyes. Please, Richard whispered. I made mistakes, but I have a family too. I have a mortgage, college tuition to pay. Then you should have thought about that before you put your family loyalty above your professional responsibilities, Daniel said, his voice softer now, but still firm. I'm sorry, Richard. I really am. But I won't have people in my company who think discrimination is acceptable. 2 security guards appeared at the office door, along with Jennifer Lee, the company lawyer. Mr. Thompson, Jennifer said professionally, we'll need your company laptop, your access badge, and your company phone. You have 10 minutes to collect personal items only. As Richard began emptying his desk drawers with shaking hands, Daniel turned to leave, but Richard's voice stopped him. Daniel, Richard said quietly, for what it's worth, I'm sorry. You're right. I let you down. I let the company down. And I let those passengers down. I thought I was protecting my family, but really, I was just being a coward. Daniel turned back to look at him. Richard looked smaller now, defeated. And despite everything, Daniel felt a flicker of sympathy. But sympathy wasn't enough to change what needed to be done. I hope you learn from this, Richard, Daniel said. I hope your family learns from this. Actions have consequences. Always. Daniel left the office and took the elevator down to the main conference room, where his executive team had assembled. The mood in the room was tense. Everyone had seen the video. Everyone knew this was a crisis. All right, Daniel said as he entered the room. Let's talk about how we fix this. For the next 2 hours, Daniel and his team worked on a comprehensive response plan. They drafted a public statement acknowledging what had happened and taking full responsibility. They outlined the new anti-discrimination training program. They announced the firings of Emily Robinson and Richard Thompson. They created a new oversight system to ensure complaints would never be buried again. But Daniel knew that statements and policies weren't enough. Action spoke louder than words. I want to do something more, Daniel said. Something that shows we're serious about change. His CFO, an older woman named Margaret Davis, spoke up. What did you have in mind? Daniel thought for a moment, then smiled for the first time that day. I want to create a passenger advocacy board. Real passengers, especially passengers from minority communities, who can review our policies and give us honest feedback. I want them to have real power, not just be for show. If they say something needs to change, we change it. His team exchanged glances. It was an unusual idea, but they could see the value in it. I love it, Margaret said. It shows we're listening. It shows we're learning. And, Daniel added, I want to set up a scholarship fund for students of color who want to work in the aviation industry. We'll pay for their training, their education, everything. I want the future of this industry to be more diverse than its past. The room filled with nodding heads and murmurs of approval. How much are we talking about for the scholarship fund? The CFO asked. $5 million to start, Daniel said without hesitation, and we'll add to it every year. By the time the meeting ended, the sun was setting outside the conference room windows. Daniel was exhausted, but there was one more thing he needed to do. He called Mrs. Patricia Hayes, the grandmother who had stood up for him at the gate. Mrs. Hayes, Daniel said when she answered, this is Daniel Miller. I wanted to thank you personally for speaking up today. Oh, Mr. Miller, Mrs. Hayes said warmly. You don't need to thank me. I just did what was right. Not everyone does what's right, even when they see something wrong, Daniel said. Your voice mattered today. It really did. They talked for a few more minutes, and before hanging up, Daniel made sure Mrs. Hayes had free flights for life on Sky High Airlines. It was the least he could do. As Daniel finally left his office that night, he walked past the TV in the lobby. The news was still covering the story, but now they were reporting on the action Sky High Airlines had taken. The firings, the new policies, and the scholarship fund. One news anchor said, "This is how you respond to a crisis. Not with excuses, but with action. Daniel Miller has shown that accountability matters, and that no one, not even longtime employees, is above doing the right thing." Daniel smiled slightly. It had been the worst day of his life in some ways. But maybe, just maybe, something good would come from it. As he walked out into the cool New York evening, his phone buzzed one more time. It was a text message from an unknown number. "Mr. Miller, you don't know me, but I flew on Sky 3 months ago and filed a complaint about how I was treated. Nobody ever responded, but I saw what you did today. Thank you for finally listening. Thank you for caring. You restore my faith in your airline and in people. Marcus Johnson." Daniel stood on the sidewalk, reading and rereading that message. This was why he'd built this company. Not for the money or the success, but to create something better, something fair, something that treated everyone with dignity. He'd stumbled today. His company had failed. But they would learn. They would grow. They would be better. And that, Daniel thought as he headed home, was what really mattered.